Okay. Okay, we'll call this meeting of the Fraser Planning Commission to order. If I could, the roll call.
Katie Souls.
Brian Cirkvenik. Bob Ganussi.
And
Joy
online,
McCoy?
Margaret Bowles. Did you hear me? I just want to make
Yep.
sure you heard. Okay, good.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thanks.
And me as well. Joy McCoy.
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you.
And then Peggy, you're muted. Are you? She must have stepped away. So Peggy is online. We'll assume she'll come on soon. And Andy Miller. Thank you. So could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Any opposed? Oh, Peggy, you're online now, or?
We
Nope.
can't hear you, Peggy.
Okay,
I think your lips are moving, but
so none opposed.
You're unmuted.
There you go. Now we can hear you.
Peggy?
Can't hear anything.
that's somebody else.
Okay, so the consent agenda tonight consists of just the minutes from September 25th. Could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second. It's Margaret.
Thank you, Margaret. All in favor?
Bye.
Aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay. So open forum tonight. I think we have a couple people online or not. It looks like just our members. Alex is our presenter tonight, or?
He's from the consultant. I'll be presenting, but yes, yeah.
Okay, so and nobody in the room for open forum, so we'll move on to discussion of possible action in the
And Greg.
comprehensive plan.
He's a presenter. Okay.
Sorry, Peg? Yep. We'll move on to discussion and possible action for the comprehensive plan, first survey results and next steps. Presentation.
Great. Thank you, Chair Miller. I did see in the chat that Peggy says she can't hear, but just to confirm, Margaret and Joy, you both can hear us okay?
I can, yes, Margaret.
Okay.
I can as well. Thank you, Garrett.
Okay. So maybe just check your speaker settings, Peggy. I will just move forward though in the interest of time with our presentation. So this presentation was basically the same as was given to the Board of Trustees just last Wednesday. We do also have Alex from Cushing Terrell online if any of the planning commissioners would like to direct any questions to our consultant specifically. Otherwise, I'm happy to talk through this myself as well. So our consultant has completed a existing conditions report as well as compiled results from the community survey that went out about a month or two ago. So this presentation largely focuses on that, as well as touching on the overall project schedule and some of the next steps in our process. So here's a look at the overall engagement schedule for the project. So we do have our project website launched. The community survey took place August and September, and then the consultant team was here at Picnic in the Park on August 20th. So our initial kind of phase one is complete. Phase two includes, compiling the results from that community survey as well as other, data sources in that existing conditions report and these presentations. We are currently scheduling interviews with various community stakeholders that will be taking place over the coming weeks. And then we're targeting our next kind of public engagement in February and March of early next year through a open house type format. And looking ahead, with additional engagement in the summer, June, July, August, September is kind of the tentative timeline.
All right, hang on one second.
Sure.
Are we addressing Peggy's chat here or?
Oh.
It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
gotta be her.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Here,
It's okay. Peggy, you could join the YouTube or watch from the YouTube live stream. That could be a potential option, but I'll just move on if that's okay.
yeah.
So Cushing Terrell pulled a few highlights from this very extensive existing conditions report that they prepared. I do want to provide some additional notes and caveats on a couple things on these slides. So right off the bat with population and demographics, I think one caveat that should be mentioned is that, with a small community like Fraser, really any of these statistics really should be taken with a grain of salt. But with that said, the data shows what the data shows. Again, just kind of fairly slow but consistent population growth here in Fraser, and then just kind of an interesting takeaway from that age range share. Another thing that I wanted to share from the data is that Fraser has a similar proportion of Hispanic population and Spanish-speaking population as the state of Colorado overall.
Sorry,
You're good.
it's muted.
You want to respond to Peggy? She should go to YouTube.
Yeah, I'm texting right
Okay, thanks.
It doesn't listen to me.
No worries.
Was that YouTube that was given the reverb?
No, it was Zoom,
Oh, interesting.
but I had my speakers muted, so I don't know how that even happened.
Yeah, that's strange. So again, just that interesting takeaway that's not reported on the slide that, our Hispanic and Spanish speaking population is similar to the state and at a higher proportion than say Grand County overall. As far as this land use map, another caveat here with regards to, the statistic about, seven times the current footprint, that's simply based on well, a couple things, just the general parcel boundaries as they currently exist, in the Grand County Assessor map, as well as just a general overall anticipated land use for that area. So a prime example of this is, looking at the kind of entirety of the West Mountain area of Grand Park, which is currently being shown as unbuilt single-family residential. Although the majority of the planning areas in this part of Grand Park are predominantly single-family residential. Certainly there are other uses identified for this area, multifamily residential, commercial, lodging, as well as, major roadways, golf courses, et cetera, et cetera. So again, just some of these statistics, just to kind of caveat them there. And kind of the same is true with unbuilt commercial. A lot of the existing land uses just come from, the town or Grand County's own GIS record. So I think really this is more of an indication that some of that data needs to be cleaned up in our own records more than anything else. One other note on the 82% of land area being owned locally. Again, that's true, but for land area, when you look at it on a parcel by parcel assessment, only 35% of the parcels in Fraser are owned locally. So actually a little over half, 51% of the parcels in Fraser are owned by a out of town, but in the state of Colorado owner, with 12% of parcels being owned by someone from out of state. So again, I think that kind of speaks to,
Can we clarify that then on this slide if we're gonna publish this?
we absolutely can clarify that.
would
And
be
I
good.
think those other statistics that I pulled are clearly spelled out in this very extensive existing conditions report,
Okay.
which again, town staff still needs to
Which
review in
this is
more
the
detail.
summary.
Yeah, this is just kind of the highlight summary, and I wanted to provide some more
Thank you.
kind of clarification on some of these things.
Okay, gotcha.
So speaking of that, kind of local ownership statistic, I think that's also in line with some of our stats on, unoccupied homes, percentage of vacation rental homes, given that around 60% of parcels are not locally owned. So does that make sense? But 82% of the land area. Again, with the downtown highlights map,
Excuse me.
oh, go ahead, Bob.
Just one quick question. So you pointed out West Mountain
Mhm.
as an example.
Sure.
Is that part of that 82%? Because a few of the big developers who own acres and acres and, of land would push that number up to 82%. But if you really dug into it, the fact is those parcels are to be developed in the future. And then you get down at the granular level of how many people live in Denver but own a vacation home up here. And so it's a tough thing to
Yeah,
kind of square all those things up and make sense out of it.
that's a fair point. I mean, with all due respect to Clark, I know you're here in the room with us. Yes, I think the ownership is purely based off the county assessor owner, or the owner as listed in the county assessor data, and then the address for that owner. So Grand Park has a Fraser or Winter Park mailing address, so therefore is identified as a local owner. Grand Park obviously owns a lot of land in the town of Fraser. So that's a fair point. You know, other large parcels of land like the open space parcel along the Fraser River, the town owns, right? So that also contributes to the higher percentage of local ownership. Some of the town-owned, government-owned parcels, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
It does.
so looking at downtown specifically, again, I think there's just some things in our current land use data records that could be cleaned up, with various parcels being identified as commercial versus residential, where maybe that doesn't match the actual use as it stands today. And then also some, maybe it's splitting hairs in some ways, but some parcels, say along Clayton Fort, for example, being identified as occupied versus unoccupied or vacant. So I think it was producing these maps is also a good exercise for town staff to recognize some of the shortcomings in our own data and records. Really though, a good amount of land area within the DDA is vacant. A large chunk of that is Victoria Village, but there still are some other significant areas that are, purely vacant, kind of more greenfield development areas. So speaking to a few things on this slide, certainly the town's biggest kind of employment industries are predominantly lower wage employment. So those workers are more vulnerable to displacement and the cost of housing. There is a significant proportion of the workforce that is 30 or younger, and it has grown over time. Another interesting thing is that the number of residents who both live and work within a 3-mile radius of Fraser has increased fourfold in the last 10 years. So that's kind of an interesting point. Along with that, though, the number of people commuting into that area within 3 miles of Fraser has also doubled. So more people are living and working within Fraser or within close proximity to Fraser, but we're also seeing an increase of in commuting into the town. So I think that shows, again, just kind of what we all know. There's more demand for housing in Fraser or close to Fraser than really exists or is being provided. Something else that was interesting from some of this analysis was kind of the trade area for a few different key businesses. And a good comparison was the Safeway here in Fraser versus the city market in Granby. And, kind of the overall trade area of where folks live that patronize those two grocery stores. And the takeaway was that certainly with Safeway and Fraser being closer to the resort, there's a much larger trade area. You see zip codes, in the Front Range lighting up as some of the, kind of more popular zip codes that visit that Safeway, whereas the city market in Granby really serves kind of a Grand County trade area predominantly, with some, outside of the county, certainly within their trade area.
But the way it's phrased though, Garrett, it's really misleading. It says local shopping. Sounds like everybody from Fraser's going to city markets, so.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Again, I think that's just with
Yeah.
maybe the way this was worded in this highlights, but as we'll see later,
A little loyalty here.
yeah,
It's our sales tax source.
yeah. As we'll see later in one of the other survey responses, Safeway was by and far the most popular grocery destination for the survey respondents.
Okay.
Yeah, so again, I guess Safeway, it's a combination of locals and visitors, certainly.
And then, so in housing, the increasing interest in vacation homes, is there a place that STRs plug in here? Because it seems like that STRs are almost, are becoming maybe as large a force as vacation homes, so.
Yeah, in the existing conditions report, it showed that so I guess vacation homes broadly are generally classified as unoccupied if they're not being lived in a majority of the year. I think is kind of the classification for census data where a lot of this is coming from. And in the existing conditions report, it stated that of the unoccupied housing stock in Fraser, 95% are vacation rentals.
Vacation rentals.
yeah.
Which is different than vacation homes.
Certainly.
yeah.
So,
It might be worth breaking those two out,
yeah,
just so we get a better idea of how many STRs versus vacation homes there are, because they are two very different uses as far as the way it affects the community, so.
yeah, that's a good point. It may have been vacation homes, as the classification instead of vacation rentals, as I'm
Yeah.
looking at my notes. So 58% of all unoccupied homes are vacation homes, or excuse me, 58% of all homes in Fraser are vacation homes. 95% of unoccupied homes in Fraser are vacation homes. Does that
It
make
doesn't
sense?
differentiate STRs though.
At least in this specific piece of data here, certainly we can look at, the number of STR licenses that
Yeah.
we have.
Yeah, we could.
I think that's in the 300 range, looking at Caitlin. Yeah. So
Yeah, I think
just to
it's
give you an
worth-
idea.
I think it's worth breaking them.
Yeah.
Into two categories, so.
Just kind of following up on that point, per the census data, 39% of the homes in Fraser are occupied year round. This is down from 66% in 2000. So again, this kind of shows, either probably a combination of new homes that are being built are primarily not occupied year round, as well as maybe homes that used to be occupied year round previously are less so. Another thing to note with the final bullet point about permitting for residential uses, that specific point is for Grand County as a whole, not just Fraser. And although I didn't, look at this much more closely, I highly suspect this could be related to, rebuilding after the East Troublesome Fire in 2020. I'm sure a lot of folks who unfortunately lost their homes, looked to rebuild in 2021 and 22, which could probably explain a pretty noticeable uptick in residential permitting for those years. That went back down kind of to baseline, 2015 through 2019 averages last year in 2023.
Sense.
So I know the statements here for sustainability and natural resources are fairly broad. To speak to them to a bit more detail, the town did produce a sustainability plan back in 2016 that we, unearthed and reviewed as part of this process. Some of the tracking metrics around, say, like greenhouse gas reductions or reductions in vehicle miles traveled that report identified. Admittedly, I think the town hasn't been tracking those over the years, as maybe was envisioned. But I think that it's very clear to say that, the town has made progress on various sustainability initiatives, things like expansion of, transit services through the lift, especially with, if you look at, utilization numbers post-COVID, they've rebounded quite well. Establishment of the drop, pay-as-you-throw trash and recycling facility, building a few different electric vehicle charging stations, and, a recent focus on more dense mixed-use walkable development, which generally is more sustainable. With regards to town services and infrastructure, again, it's probably just preaching to the choir here, but you all know a lot of the various initiatives that have been spearheaded over the past few years through our public works. One recent one is inventory and mapping of all drainage outfalls into the Fraser River this past summer, working towards an update to a storm drainage master plan. Reducing inflow and infiltration of groundwater into sewer mains throughout town, working with breweries, distilleries, and wineries on an industrial pretreatment program, leak detection in our water mains so that we're not wasting, precious treated water, and as well as replacing our water meters throughout town to provide real-time demand and usage data. A couple things here. Again, I think these are all things as Fraser residents you all are aware of. Our outdoor recreation opportunities are a key reason why a lot of folks choose to live here or visit here. It was one of the primary reasons per the survey that people, come to Fraser. And enhancing the Fraser River and adjacent green spaces was a top priority for downtown development, as we'll see later in the survey responses. Mobility was also a key aspect of our survey respondents' vision for downtown Fraser. And I think that ties in a lot to this map that you see here, where, we have sidewalks along Highway 40, but outside of that, it's fairly limited. Certainly, the Fraser River Trail is a great asset, as well as the, pathway along Highway 40, the Fraser to Granby Trail, and heading down into Winter Park. But a lot of our local streets, once you get off kind of those main corridors, don't have sidewalks. And there's also, not great crossings along 40, I would say. That showed up very consistently in the survey responses. So again, just focusing on making sure that we are providing for a range of mobility options as we look at downtown and other development in Fraser more broadly. So speaking briefly about the community survey, there were 15 questions, 8 multiple choice, 7 open-ended. We had various means of outreach, picnic in the park, when the consultant was here in person and speaking with folks in town and encouraging to fill out the survey. We also emailed it out to some local businesses, had flyers posted throughout places throughout town, and included it in the town's newsletter, ultimately resulting in 180 responses, which I think is a fairly good response rate, but certainly would like to see that number increase for future engagement rounds.
Do we have any demographic breakout of the responses and who responded and who didn't respond? That would be something I'd like to know, is who
Yes.
didn't respond if they live here.
Yeah, so that's kind of covered by these next 2 questions, but great point. So this one could be a little bit hard to parse out because it is a select all that apply. Like for myself, I live full-time in Grand County outside of Fraser, and I work full-time in Fraser, and certainly I recreate in Fraser. But the fact that 44% of the respondents live full-time in Fraser, I think we are capturing a good percentage of our, full-time year-round population, as well as certainly a mix of other folks, people who live here part-time or just come up to visit occasionally or vacation up here, as well as folks who live in other parts of the county, whether that be Winter Park, unincorporated Grand County, et cetera. But, work or visit Fraser for whatever reason. In terms of the age of our respondents, it did skew older. If you compare this to the overall age breakdown of full-time residents in Fraser, I think kind of a plurality of Fraser residents are in the 25 to 54 range, whereas here, we have a plurality in that 45 plus range. So the survey respondents do skew older, so that I think that's maybe just something to, again, keep in the back of your mind with some of the responses overall. So with this question 3, again, it was open-ended, and Cushing Terrell, our consultant, kind of tried to categorize those responses into these various buckets here. And, community character could be quite broad. So just to give a few kind of sample responses, a few things, or I guess a common theme among responses was some flavor of, Fraser is a safe and healthy community. It's unpretentious, it's quiet, peaceful, friendly. People talked about the scenic views and how beautiful the Fraser Valley is. Some folks said, it's not overly developed or as crowded as, say, Winter Park in the resort area or other kind of Colorado mountain communities, and that we had, laid back small town vibes. Another thing, because, I think outdoor recreation is pretty apparent and evident for us, but an interesting thing with location was not just, access to the resort, access to public services. A common theme, which maybe isn't surprising, was proximity to Denver and proximity to the airport, not being located on the interstate, but still having, good access to amenities, whether that be outdoor recreation amenities, services, businesses, things like that. So. And speaking to some of the most important topics for the comp plan's focus, top 3 were preservation of natural resources, growth management, and housing. Followed closely by quality of life, economic development, and mobility. So again, I think this kind of echoes some other responses, how, for downtown Fraser, key priority is enhancing and preserving the Fraser River. And growth management, I think, also kind of ties into a lot of the community character type of responses, right? Making sure Fraser doesn't grow too fast, or gets grows so much that we kind of lose, the small town feel that many survey respondents really identify and value. So question 5 was certainly an interesting one. Basically just asking folks what specific establishments they patronize in the following kind of spending categories. So for grocery, Safeway was far and away the most common, not really surprising there. Ace Hardware was the most common for hardware, home garden stores, as well as quite a few Murdoch's respondents. And then really for the rest, even though we're identifying the top 2, and in reading through the responses, I feel like, basically every restaurant between the resort and Tabernash was identified, but these were just kind of the ones that rose to the top. Certainly many other, basically every business, restaurant business in the area was identified. And same for sporting goods, outdoor recreation gear, local experience, exports, and places in Winter Park were also certainly mentioned, and not too far, these, 35 and 30 counts for Icebox and Murdoch's there.
Hey, Garrett,
Yeah.
just a quick question. Why does Murdoch show up twice?
So it was a completely open-ended question. So, I guess some respondents felt like, oh, I shop at Murdoch's primarily for home garden hardware, whereas others identified Murdoch's as their primary, establishment for sporting goods and outdoor rec. Does that make sense?
All right.
It really does. I mean, it encompasses a lot of categories. Certainly, you can get a lot at Murdoch's. So
I'm curious of the Fishers slash Camber. Were they each 21 or is that a combined 21?
that's a great question. And I'm not sure.
Okay.
They may have both been at 21 would be my guess. And instead of just listing 3.
That's correct, Garrett.
Okay, thanks, Alex.
They were tied for 21. Yeah.
Good point.
Cool.
Question 6 was related to that and asking respondents what type of new establishment they thought, Fraser most needed. And far and away, most folks identified, food and drink, restaurant type establishments. Fairly significant number also identified retail establishments as well. So again, I think shows that there's certainly demand for additional options for commercial establishments throughout town. Certainly a lot of references to specific chains or brands for retail or restaurant or grocery. Did receive, I think, around 14 or 15 very specific no chain responses. So again, not a majority, thinking about 132 responses to this question, roughly 10%, really having strong feelings against chain establishments. Question 7 looked at focus areas for downtown development in Fraser. And again, this was a multiple choice question. So I think it just shows really the range of priorities among respondents for downtown Fraser. But what landed at the top was enhancing the Fraser River Trail and green spaces, followed by kind of being consistent with the last question, expanding retail and restaurant options, as well as, supporting small businesses and entrepreneurship. Some other key things, streetscapes, placemaking, developing a Fraser Main Street really align with our efforts on Clayton Court. And some other popular responses related to connectivity, traffic flow, and infrastructure improvements, multimodal transportation and parking as well. So question 8, again, the top response was categorized as community character. And I think a lot of times those community character responses, again, were very broad or maybe covered multiple different categories. But a couple kind of maybe sample responses or a common theme were, make downtown a destination, have a critical mass of business variety, do things that the resort and Winter Park aren't doing while also maintaining the small town laid back feel.
Jared, how do you think community character and quality of life mesh together? So I see quality of life in a couple of places, but is there kind of a common theme between those two, do you think, or?
Yeah, I think so. And Alex, feel free to chime in. I think they certainly are related. A lot of the community character responses do relate to quality of life metrics in some ways, whether that's, a safe and friendly community or, I have access to the services I need, whether that's, the education system or
Mobility.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I
It-
would say quality life is kind of character. Community character can range from the physical built environment to the people and the neighborhoods. So we see that tend to be the largest because it is kind of just so subjective and hard to break down. So we tend to include that and group those together in terms of the people as well as the physical environment.
I don't know if there's a way to do it going forward, but maybe to more specifically address that, I think it's you know, it's an important decision-making tool as to how we balance density and numbers of people and access and noise and speed and all the things that kind of are ingredients to a good quality of life as we get bigger and bigger. Because to me, that's one thing I worry about as we become a bigger and bigger town, as our quality of life deteriorates. So
Yeah.
I think in our planning efforts, hopefully we can address that. We can grow and still be a fairly a relatively enjoyable place to live. And
Yeah,
and safety is part of that, but it's, you know, it comes down to discussions of brake regulations and discussions we've had about speed limits and ways that we can still enjoy living here without, as traffic increases and as all these things are going to increase as we get more people.
mhm,
So,
yeah, absolutely. So question 9 asks folks what type of housing they would like to see more of. And again, multiple choice. Folks could select as many options as they wanted. Do you think it's interesting that still the most popular response is single family detached? You know, I think it's just something to keep in mind that even as we look to, you know, develop our downtown area with denser development and more condo or apartment style housing, at least in terms of the folks that responded to this survey, and I think it's probably true for maybe the population in general, single family detached housing is still a very popular and desired style of housing. But certainly, you know, if you're looking at options that have, say, 25% response rate or above, you're looking at, you know, 6 different types of housing options. So I think it also just points to a desire to have a range of options in Fraser.
Garrett, I have a question on, in terms of, for the people that are checking single family detached homes, is there anywhere that we can glean how many of our residents here, living here, that retired here?
Sure.
Basically, they didn't grow up here,
Mhm.
but I think it seems like I've seen more people wanting to retire up here.
Mhm.
And their needs are going to change as they retire and age out, such that maybe single family detached isn't what they need when they're in their 70s or 80s. Maybe it's a planned community, senior living community, which I don't know that we have any here at the moment.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And
Mark,
yeah.
that's something to think about for the future. Hey, I'm retired and I'm living here.
We'll save a spot in the middle apartments for you.
Oh.
A lot of seniors there.
Oh, good.
There are actually a lot of seniors that live.
Well, I probably qualify for the
Great.
60% AMI now that I'm retired.
They live there.
Yep.
Yeah, Social Security.
Yeah.
We could qualify. It's great.
Yeah. And you know, I don't recall. So you see there's 19% responses. I don't recall off the top of my head if senior specific housing was mentioned under that category. I think it's certainly possible that
think
some
so.
responses probably mentioned that specifically. And I guess another thing just to mention, going back to the beginning with the fact that this survey respondents skew a bit older, that's probably another reason why maybe single family detached kind of came out ahead of some other housing options. You think about maybe in general, younger folks, maybe you know, even either living by themselves or in a couple, smaller family size. Typically, you know, that's, you know, some of the other housing types are more preferable to those households.
I think you're spot on there, because
Yeah.
in that range that made up the greatest percentage of respondents, those would also be considered likely families that are in their prime earning years,
Sure.
Right.
so they can afford the housing up here.
Well, and I think once someone has a family, I bet you 80–90% of them want a single family home,
Sure.
No,
which is
agree.
understandable.
Yeah.
And it's interesting is our population does age, short of having a facility that oxygen is plumbed into the whole building. A lot of people end up having to leave when they get in their 80s
Sure.
because they just,
You're
the elevation gets them. And
Not
it's-
up
You're
to 80.
absolutely right. I can
It's
think of a
unfortunate.
couple examples in our neighborhood,
Mhm.
people that have
Yep,
left.
I have friends also.
And part of the reason was as they aged out, they
Yeah.
had breathing problems.
Anyway, it's interesting. Okay. Granby's a little old.
Excuse me, please. This is PC Joy McCoy.
Yeah. Hey, Joy.
Just to clarify, can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
To clarify about senior and assisted living, the closest is Granby, and those particular resources, there are huge waiting lists for both of those. So that is a county-wide community need, and definitely for the Fraser Valley.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you, Joy. That's a great point. Good point. Yeah. So question 10 asked survey respondents how they feel about short-term rentals in Fraser. A plurality, about 40% of respondents say that they think there are too many. But close behind that at 30%, folks said they're not sure. I think this is just something we don't want to, for lack of a better word, bite the hand that feeds us. I think we all know that our economy here in Fraser is largely driven by tourism and visitors, and a lot of those visitors choose to stay in short-term rentals. But the fact that 70% either say they think there are too many, or they're just not sure, could indicate that it's just something worth discussing. Our short-term rental regulations and licensing requirements and things like that. So
There aren't a lot of options.
yes, that's true. So. The next question was, when you're in Fraser and making trips of less than 5 miles, how do you usually get around? Again, multiple choice, so the percentages exceed 100 here. So a lot of folks do drive alone, but still a good percentage of folks who bike or walk or roll throughout town. Roll could be, either scooter, skateboard, or even wheelchair users. Kind of a small percentage of transit bus users at 7%, especially when looking at this next question. This was kind of interesting because the plurality of respondents rated our transit infrastructure as good. If you include very good and good, then half of respondents, said our transit infrastructure was good or very good. So just kind of interesting that only 7% of respondents say that they do, use the bus in getting around, but then that half of respondents say that our transit infrastructure is good. So that's kind of a interesting maybe gap there. Certainly,
What was the question again on transit, the first one? 5 miles?
when you're making trips of less than 5 miles.
Yeah.
So,
How do you usually get around, which, yeah, I don't know. So,
yeah, I mean, where do you draw the line? I think, the resort is probably more than 5 miles away from parts of Fraser, certainly. But maybe in respondents' minds, 5 miles is a little bit shorter, and they think, well, I take the bus when I'm going to the resort, or if I live in Granby and I use the commuter bus or something. But yeah,
what percentage of your trips are done by car, by bus? I don't know, that some other ways to maybe break that out. So,
sure, yeah. But going back to question 12 about how folks describe the quality of transportation infrastructure, a plurality said that our pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure is fair. If you include fair or worse, then it's a majority of respondents said that for our pedestrian cyclist infrastructure. So again, I think this indicates that, certainly can make improvements to our non-motorized infrastructure. But in general, based on our survey responses, it seems like we're maybe doing a bit better with transit than, say, walkability, bikeability. question 13 was open-ended. And essentially for each of these different categories, folks kind of identified a specific area. So kind of the way to read this, I believe, is 80% of survey respondents were able to identify an area that's difficult or unsafe to cross the road. Around 60% identified an area that's difficult or unsafe to walk, bike, roll along, and et cetera, et cetera. And really just looking at the range of responses, I think just about every major cross street along Highway 40 was mentioned as a difficult or unsafe place to cross the road. And I think that was true whether it was signalized, like at Safeway, whether we have, marked crosswalks and signage, like at Fraser Avenue or by the post office, or if there's just no crossing at all, like at the access road into the Lions Ponds and Old Victory Road. There's really no marked crossing there, and some folks identified that as a place they would like a crossing.
What's the status of our flashers for the crosswalks?
Yeah, so they are
They're
being
being
installed.
Are they okay?
Yes, is my understanding.
Cool.
The goal is to have them in before ski season starts, essentially.
Right.
And we'll have them on the center island also,
Yes.
which is, that'll help a lot.
We just hope that people don't assume that when the flashers are going off, people will actually stop. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, and just in closing for the last two questions about concerns and opportunities for the future of Fraser, I think the interesting takeaway here was that the most common response for both concern and opportunity was growth and development. Interesting though that for concern, it was nearly a majority at 48%, and followed fairly far, far behind with housing, probably housing affordability, I would have to imagine. But whereas when you look at opportunities, there's kind of a wider range with growth and development being around a quarter, followed by community character, natural resources, outdoor rec, et cetera. So yeah, again, just some of the key takeaways. Natural resources is one of the most, if not the most important planning topic from the survey respondents. Growth and development is both an area of concern and opportunity. As planning commissioners, you all recognize that growth and development plays that dual role in our community. Many respondents, identified community character as a major reason why they are in Fraser, whether that be full-time residency, work, or visiting. And think that community character should be a consideration as we look to develop the downtown DDA area. Again, just a lot of respondents identifying areas that are difficult or unsafe to cross or walk along streets. And outdoor rec and enhancing the Fraser River Trail was kind of a common theme throughout. So additional engagement opportunities to come. As I mentioned, we have some stakeholder interviews scheduled and to be scheduled over the coming weeks. The conversations that the consultant team and town staff have with stakeholders will be documented and incorporated into the existing conditions report. I think so timing of that existing conditions report being kind of made public and hosted on the project website is kind of pending the completion of these stakeholder interviews, as well as the kind of QC by town staff of some of the statistics and metrics that I mentioned previously. And then more broad community engagement to happen throughout the coming months through open houses and additional surveys.
So when do you see the actual full report being available for review?
Yeah, so going back up to this slide here, I think we have
That's right, you have the timeline, sorry.
yeah, no, you're good. So I don't think it explicitly says, oh, it does here. So June, July, present the draft plan for public comment and project prioritization. So kind of around the middle of next year is when we expect to have this plan document at least in a draft form, ready and viewable.
But
for-
staff is reviewing a draft form at this point, or?
Yeah, so really the primary plan documentation that we have is the existing conditions report, which would be certainly incorporated as
Oh,
like
it's a
an
discussion.
appendix.
Okay. Yeah.
And we're working towards various, plan element items that would be in that the actual comprehensive plan itself, if that makes
Okay.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking to some of those plan elements, a key one is kind of this concept or vision plan for the downtown Fraser area. That's being worked on, currently. Cushing Terrell is targeting November for kind of first draft internal review with town staff. We are planning on presenting it to the DDA in December. Certainly, the DDA board is a public body and the public could attend that meeting if they would like. But really, the point of presenting it to the DDA board is to get their feedback and incorporate things into it before it goes to a broader public audience. Timing of February, March of next year. Alongside that, some of the kind of recommendations of, goals, policies, actions, etc. Timeline for that is to have them at least in a draft form by January, again, with the intention that town staff reviews those in January and then maybe tweaks them before they are presented to the public in that open house in February or March of next year. So I know we had some good questions and discussion, but any other items either from the Planning Commission or folks in the room or online?
Excuse me, Garrett, this is PC Joy McCoy.
Yeah.
On Q6 of the survey responses, it listed local as establishment suggestion. Is that like small business entrepreneurship, or would you clarify that like a local establishment, just locally owned, do you think is what that is defined as?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think you're probably right, but Alex, do you remember kind of the general tenor of responses that were categorized as local for this question 6?
Yeah, generally small business, local business was the thought behind that categorization.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
as opposed to say a restaurant, it was more just like, I want to see more local businesses.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I also just wanted to clarify so I'm not making an assumption. So when we talk about land use, does that include our natural resources as far as like a 7% potential increase in residential land use, for example? That also includes the natural resources within that land use.
I think broadly speaking, yes. So this existing land use map that we're looking at right now is based on in the town GIS records, there's a land use designation. And thinking about natural resources or open space land uses, certainly areas that are, clearly identified, clearly identified as open space, like the open space along the Fraser River Trail, or even going through kind of the core downtown area, some of the open space parcels, or the trail system open space parcels up in Rendezvous. But I think in terms of existing land uses that have like development potential, it doesn't necessarily account for some of the open space that would be incorporated in that, if that makes sense.
It does, Garrett, and I think specifically, I was thinking about the water usage, but that's sustainable within, that 7 times, that 7 times potential of
Yeah.
residential increase if the water is natural resources sustainable.
Yeah, and I guess another, again, caveat to that 7x figure, it's purely just based on land area and not, that doesn't mean that there's the potential as it stands today to, 7x the number of residential units in Fraser based on current, zoning and entitlements and things like that, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or discussion?
This doesn't call for any action. This is a review. So
Correctly, yeah, just purely informational, giving you all an update on where we're at with the comp plan and kind of next steps moving forward, so.
anything further? Okay. So we'll move on to Clayton Court, 150 Clayton Court sketch plan.
Awesome, thank you. Oh,
We have the project proponents or?
I do see that Greg and Kevin are online. I do have a presentation prepared. Certainly, Greg and Kevin, if you want to interject, feel free. And yeah, thank you, Alex, for attending. Very helpful.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Item up for review and discussion this evening. No action, just review and discussion. Is this sketch plan for the proposed Centrum development. Currently addressed as 150 Clayton Court. Just a quick comment about that. This property actually has two addresses per the county assessor, with the other being 150 Xeric Street. Certainly the address of this property will change as, site plan and subdivision plats are approved. But for now, and when this comes to the planning commission and board in the future, we might just reference it as its development name, just to clarify.
It has an address on 40 and on Clayton Court then.
It does, yeah, currently. So just as a refresher, I know we reviewed a sketch plan back in, I think, August. But just as a reminder, kind of what the purpose of sketch plans are, it's simply to provide the town the opportunity to describe our vision to the applicant and vice versa, give the applicant an opportunity to discuss plans for their site development, and just obtain input and direction kind of early on in the process. And our code does allow for the applicant or town staff to present the sketch plan to the planning commission for preliminary feedback. Greg and Kevin from Out West Investments, formerly Bison, said explicitly that they really wanted to get this in front of you all for review and discussion, and excited to talk through this with you all today. So overview of the proposal: the applicant is Out West Investments. Again, that's formerly Bison. The property owner is Fraser Downtown LLC. This property is located at the southern end of Clayton Court, adjacent to Highway 40. This is lot 8 of the previous Clayton Court subdivision. What's proposed is 5 residential condo units and approximately 2,400 square feet of commercial space, and that square footage figure includes like an outdoor patio area. And that would be part of phase 1 of this development. Phase 2 is mixed use, kind of ultimately to be determined in terms of quantity of uses, but likely, a mix of residential and commercial. And this property is zoned in the Riverwalk district. Here's a look at the location of the development. Again, the southernmost parcel on Clayton Court, in between Highway 40 and Clayton Court. Definitely kind of a interesting shaped parcel, which has, some interesting opportunities, but certainly also some challenges with development. Taking a look at the zoning map, again, the property is zoned Riverwalk, primarily surrounded by other parcels that are also zoned Riverwalk, but a few zoned business across Highway 40, as well as the HTA building to the south actually being zoned as open space. Here's kind of a look at the existing conditions of the property, at least per Google Street View from a year ago. Just kind of showing, from Clayton Avenue up to the north, the largely vacant parcel that used to be home to a few mobile homes. One thing that I do want to note off to the left here is if you can tell how Clayton Avenue slopes down from Highway 40 to Clayton Court. Clayton Court sits approximately 9 feet below the existing grade of Highway 40. And even with our planned infrastructure improvements along Clayton Court, that will still hold true based on the proposed grading for Clayton Court after those improvements. So fairly decent grade differential across the site going from Highway 40 to Clayton Court.
So curious, that's right at the bottleneck in terms of the width of Highway 40. I know that CDOT is planning, when you look at it, the lot that isn't part of it, that's just adjacent to where that the laundry facility is in there. It,
Not the
What's
laundry
gonna hap-
facility, it's that home. There's a home right there and then the laundry facility.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
and then right beyond it.
Right.
So when CDOT does their planning, would they have, if they needed more room in there, would they be able to, would they ever condemn property to be able to widen the road and in that area?
I mean, the short answer is yes, CDOT would have the ability to take additional right of way if necessary. One of the items included in the packet was the conceptual plans that were produced back in 2020 for this expansion of Highway 40. So again, with the caveat being that they're conceptual and yet to be finalized, my recollection, and I have some slides showing them later, but my recollection is that really adjacent to this property, CDOT was not anticipating any right-of-way acquisition.
Be pretty tough to, because you've got that white house that's right on the highway.
Right,
I mean, to widen it here, you'd have to take the white house out.
right,
So,
correct.
yeah, and then the house next door to it too,
Yeah.
the laundry facility, yep. So that's, yeah, it's like you say, it's the bottleneck and it's on a curve, both. So,
So I just wonder if there's a point where, well, it'll be interesting to see. That's something to keep in mind and for the
well, it'd be,
out west investments too, if CDOT would trump at some point in time over.
well, it's
maybe
hard to
that-
see how though, Katie, without CDOT. I mean, the town would have to have some input, I would assume, and I can't imagine we'd take two buildings out to or have the resources to take two buildings out, one of which is local housing, obviously, the other one's a business, and then
Yeah,
right
Mhm.
beyond it is Lori Meyer's building that, if she still owns it, I'm not sure that,
no.
it's far,
Why
it's
is it
far,
like-
it's farther back.
I mean,
So,
it shows that there's space for 4 lanes.
yeah, you have that picture then from later in the presentation.
Okay,
Yeah.
they still can squeeze that in there.
Yep, that'll
Okay.
be a right in, right out, but yeah, that's.
And does it show it just before that, where this lot is that we're talking about?
But so I got it up on the screen here.
Oh, good.
There you
Thank you.
go, yeah.
And it may be hard to see some of this detail here on the presentation, but again, this full PDF file of the entire conceptual plans is in the planning
That's
commission
right.
packet. So the right-of-way line, I believe, is like this right here.
Yeah, so it does head into that property stuff.
Well, but this right here is the
Sidewalk.
sidewalk and curb and gutter, and then you see the two travel lanes northbound. So
But if the right of way is that far over, then they could use that.
yeah, they could, and
to
again,
expand to that point. Just something to keep in mind.
yeah,
Well, it pertains to a comment later on that we're gonna be talking about whether there should be business frontage on the highway up here or not, so.
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely. So just taking a look at this sketch plan overall, this is kind of broken up into, I would say, 3 different parts and 2 phases of development. And I'll just talk through them kind of in turn, starting with the phase 1 building, which is that kind of blue, roughly L-shaped area. And again, this is pretty conceptual. So we're really just looking at the ground floor, the building footprint and the ground floor uses here. But talking about some of the, you know, positives or ways this really meets the intent of the Riverwalk district is that commercial frontage along Clayton Court here, up to a 20 feet in depth as required by code. Part of that does include this patio space, but is meant to serve, you know, these identified restaurant uses and help provide, you know, some kind of articulation and interest to the building. So it's not just a 120-foot long flat wall. Another thing, you know, on-site parking is located away from pedestrian areas. This sketch plan calls for a single access driveway that would serve both phase 1 and phase 2, and then parking that would serve the 5 residential units to be located in garages, access from the rear of the building. Parking for the commercial uses would be accommodated by parallel parking that would be provided with the roadway infrastructure improvements to Clayton Court. And just based on, you know, some rough calculations, there should be sufficient spaces in front of this building to meet the minimum parking required based on the square footage of these uses. And then also, you know, if you look at Out West's presentation that was provided in the packet, they had a project intent kind of image of a project in Steamboat Springs, which, you know, kind of the architectural style of that building is really consistent with previously approved developments in the Riverwalk zone, and just overall pretty attractive looking building.
Jared, where's the well? We have a well on this property.
We sure do.
We
And
have a
I'll,
well house and a well that are separate.
It's where the park would be.
yeah,
Well, the wellhead, I was out there the other day and the wellhead is a long ways away from our well building. And
It-
it looks like it's in this development footprint.
it is. So speaking to kind of the primary comments that the town had specific to phase 1, so the building itself conflicts with a raw water line, as well as it kind of overlaps with this well protection area. So to speak through that,
Can you
the
point to where the well is?
the well itself is where this red dot is on the screen. So kind of on the
Oh,
western
in that
central.
open space. Okay, not the north open space, but got it.
Correct. So the markups that are shown here are some comments that after discussing this with Greg and Kevin and other town staff, just some suggestions that we had for this phase 1 area. One of which included, you know, having some open space area around the well. Our water superintendent Lucas indicated that really you don't want to have, you know, the entire area around a well just be paved kind of as was originally shown. Really, this area was just being utilized for a couple guest parking spots, which likely aren't needed anyways. So there wasn't any huge issue with just having some kind of open green space here around that well, so that well can still function properly, as well as give town public works staff room to, you know, park a maintenance vehicle to service and maintain that well when
Got it.
necessary.
Okay.
Along the west side of the property, it's kind of hard to see here, but there is a raw water line and an easement that's shown on the sketch plan right through here, going up to the well building, which is just off the image here. And then that raw water line ultimately connects to one within the Clayton Court right of way. So as it stands right now, you know, certainly we wouldn't allow the building to be built on top of that raw water line or that easement. But it would be fairly simple to simply just relocate that raw water line to run through the access driveway area out to Clayton Court so that it doesn't conflict with the building footprint as proposed. Additionally, the well house that is located just to the north of this proposed building likely could be relocated to be adjacent to the well itself.
It's kind of odd. I guess the mobile homes parked down there and separated it because of the mobile home lots. So, yeah,
Yeah, just some interesting history with this area. So
must have belonged to an excavator.
yeah.
Excuse me, Garrett, how is snow storage taken into consideration with this concept?
Yeah, that's a fair point. So with the sketch plans, no storage areas were not identified. Certainly that was something that we discussed. Certainly some snow storage could likely be located in this kind of triangular open space area adjacent to the well. But it's certainly possible that, you know, I can let Greg and Kevin speak to this maybe as well, but I don't know if they've investigated this any further, but they may need to be looking at, kind of temporary storage on the phase 2 site with some sort of offsite agreement down the road, or something along those lines could be the most likely if there isn't room within phase 1 to accommodate that snow storage.
Yeah, Garrett, I can jump in real quick.
Yeah.
We're revamping this plan a little bit, just with the well and moving some things around. But the new plan will have sufficient snow storage for just truck to push it straight into a few areas with not blocking the well. So we're working on that for the first submittal.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So another thing that's specific to the well is this 50-foot radius, 100-foot diameter protection area that's shown in kind of the light purple hatched area. And this is based on a state regulation, specifically no septic tank, sewer line, whether that's a sewer main or a sewer service line, or any other vessel containing contaminants, that could be like a grease trap for a restaurant, for example, should be located in this 50-foot radius. Furthermore, no sources of contamination should be located within a 100-foot radius of the well. But there's less of a concern with that. I mean, a source of contamination is like something that is actively contaminating the groundwater, which,
A gas station.
yeah, generally speaking, yeah. Or something that was supposed to be contained but is, leaking. I think Peggy raised her hand. You can go ahead, Peggy.
Oh, darn it.
It says
Or
you're
iPhone.
muted, Peggy, or
I think it
Does
was
that
our-
work? Is that
There
working?
Yes.
you are.
I
Gotcha.
can hear you.
iPhone?
Okay. Okay, well, I'm kind of wondering, it seems to me like without acquiring Lori Meyer's building and the other two buildings, this is sort of a forced adventure to make this work. And it just sort of makes me wonder why we don't start with the corner that you already have, which is now scheduled to be phase 2, and make that phase 1, and then work on the acquiring of additional land, so we don't end up with a little bitty pocket park that we probably don't need, that we would like to have as retail or housing.
Hmm.
I think that's a fair point, Peggy. I think certainly we can't force any entity to acquire adjacent properties if they're still meeting all applicable zoning regulations. So I think it's a fair point that the shape of the parcel certainly lends itself to some development challenges that maybe could be mitigated with acquisition of adjacent properties. But maybe just a couple things. This phase 1 building has, maybe it's probably comparable in size to the commercial space of the front Kozlik building. Actually, it's probably less. And Greg and Kevin, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It's more than the retail space for Strom, but less so than Kozlik. I think this building as proposed is fairly in line with kind of the vision for the type of development that is desired in the Riverwalk district and along Clayton Court, generally speaking. But I do understand your comment that acquiring additional property and kind of mitigating some of the challenges with the shape of this parcel could lend to maybe a superior development overall.
Well, I
Yeah,
think yeah,
oh, go ahead, Peggy.
well, I just look at it and it's very hard without understanding because on your lot, your drawing, you don't have the Myers lot and the whatever the accounting place used to be, and there's 3 buildings right there. So right now it looks like all the parking's going to be fronted on 40, which I don't think is ideal. And I just think it's really hard to visualize when you haven't acquired those properties. And I hope that you do, because I think it's important to make this thing work.
Definitely. And Peggy, I think you bring up some great points. So a few things that we were thinking about when doing phase 1, phase 2 here. And I think once we have the actual submittal together for phase 1, it's going to look more congruent and a little better and allow for those lots in the future. The reason we're doing this as phase 1 is candidly because of the smaller retail footprint and just the way the code reads. It's kind of a flyer right now. I mean, you saw the picture on Google Maps of where we're building. And we have a good, to Garrett's point, the retail space is about the size for 2 small restaurants, which we have spoken for or under LOI here.
Mm-hmm.
And in phase 2, with just how the code reads, we'd have to deliver 2x, 3x, 2.5x that retail space. And our concern is just, hey, we need a proof of concept over here, which I think we can do. We're in, I wouldn't say negotiation to acquire those lots. We've tried. And there's a few, I'd say, nuances, but the goal would be, and one of the things in the sketch plan and why we have the park there is with those 2 lots, you could build on that area where the park is, kind of in the upper side of the screen. What we could also do, since the code requires retail on 40, is if that does become a park and those lots do become developed in the near future, that the retail then backs up to a park, which we like. And then some of the other retail that we're building in phase 1 also comes to a park. But that's why we wanted to bring it to this group first, is because the feedback from this group, usually when we come in for a preliminary plat, it's too late to incorporate a lot of feedback. Now is kind of the ripe time to get the opinion of the stakeholders, and why Greg and I were so adamant about getting this in front of everyone early, so we can make some significant adjustments if we need to this plan before our architect and civil and everyone goes off, and then it's harder to change.
Well, I guess my concern is originally where the distillery is what I wanted to see a park, and I was convinced way back when that the goal of the River District was not to have all these parks. We have a 6-mile long linear park. We've got a park in the middle of town. We've got hopefully some conservation easement land. And so once you paint that green and you call it a park, it becomes a park. And I think we just saw an election where it really wasn't supposed to be a park. It was supposed to be a placeholder. And my guess is that will never, ever happen, that will always stay as a park. And we're also talking about trying to do some stormwater drainage over by the Headwaters building, which that is a park also. And so I think that the goal of the Riverwalk District was to have increased density and not so much green space, which we're surrounded by in lots of other areas.
Yeah, and one of the things, which I think is good feedback, we wanted to, the idea or the original idea was to dedicate the land to the town or transfer it to the town. It doesn't really change anything for us not to do that and just keep it privately owned land, and slate it for future development. So it's something I think we can have a broader discussion on, because if we want to do that, then instead of being green on there, it's just future development, which might lend itself better if that's how the group feels.
Well, I just think when you acquire the Myers lot, I mean, that backs up to it, and that changes the whole. I mean, right now it's probably unbuildable. But
Exactly.
in the future, it wouldn't be.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think that's something that we should all talk about and maybe hopefully plan for. The other thing we just want to make sure too, which we have shown in here, is that there's more connections from 40 to Clayton Court in the future, not just the two on the ends of Clayton Court. So figuring out, because one of the ideas was eventually the park connects, if it is a park. We have that elevated pedestrian path shown towards phase 2 and figuring out how to make that work. So yeah, there's definitely some more creative ideas here, but this is the discussion we were kind of looking for and the feedback we were looking for.
Okay, well, I think it's hard for me to visualize without having a concept of what's going on the west side of that parcel.
Definitely.
I think that's good feedback. The one concept of that park that I like, even if it's not specific to this becoming a park, was, and you discussed this in the review, that substituting open space for a dedicated public park. I hope we can do that. I mean, we've got a lot of open space in town, especially in the Ptarmigan area along the river. It's private, and I think having more public open space, and in lieu of open space in an actual development, if the developer donates that open space, I think that could be a substitution. I would think it'd be a good substitution for open space within a project.
Yeah. And on the community survey, 68% of the people, that was part of the concern, preservation of natural resources, which included open space.
But I agree with Peggy,
So-
I agree with Peggy, though, that leaving this open at this time for possible inclusion in a lot that may be purchased next door makes a lot of sense. Not tying the hands of the town or the developer at this point, seeing how things flesh out with the rest. I really understand the reason that the developer would like to go with this smaller building to begin with, because we're planting a couple seeds down there, and we can't ask them to risk a really large investment until we get some traffic onto Clayton Court, and foot traffic onto Clayton Court, I should say. So it makes sense.
Regarding that green section that we're looking at, isn't that a well building,
Well,
that
yes.
utility building?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that utility building is the well house that I mentioned earlier. And this right here is the easement for the raw water line that runs from the well to this building. And then there's this easement as well as the raw water line goes into the Clayton Court right of way. So if the raw water line is relocated to go from the well here through the proposed access road right into the Clayton Court right of way, all of those easements and also that well building could be relocated down there. Those easements would go away, and that kind of opens up more space on this lot for, various park uses or future development if adjacent properties are acquired and therefore make this, more feasible to develop. But since I think we're, talking about this, I'll kind of just jump ahead and speak to this a bit. So our code does speak to land dedication requirements for parks and schools. It's a requirement for all subdivisions. And per a resolution that was passed back in 1998, our requirement is that 5% of the subdivision area should be dedicated or conveyed to the town as a public park. If it's not feasible to do so because it's either a small subdivision or there's just not suitable land within that subdivision to dedicate a park, then a developer can pay a fee in lieu. And that's what we've seen more commonly, like with Kozlig and with Strom Townhomes and some other smaller subdivision developments. One key requirement that our code says is that the park area should be at least 3,000 square feet for the town to consider it, an adequate size to take on and actually be usable as a public park space. And what's being proposed is 3,800 square feet. So it does meet that requirement at least. And I think in speaking to kind of a broader vision, if this area were to be a public park, it kind of ties in with this broader idea of east-west connectivity between and through downtown Fraser and to the river area. So I just starting with like this top line here, this is, the Amtrak train station, which we are excited and hopeful to have as a stop on the CDOT Mountain Passenger Rail, right on Fraser Ave, which has an existing crosswalk, which would be enhanced, going past Kozelig and to, the Fraser Center for the Creative Arts and Strom Townhomes, which has, the Creative Arts Center is planned to have this, enhanced outdoor space adjacent to the river. Along the south, it's envisioned that, the crosswalk at Goranson Station would be relocated to align with Clayton Avenue. This is per CDOT's conceptual plans from 2020. And they also propose closing off Byers Avenue here at 40 and actually having the vehicular connection here and kind of strengthening that as both a vehicle and pedestrian connection at the south end of Clayton Court. And then really what's missing is this middle connection. So Eisenhower's plan to have a traffic signal as part of the Highway 40 expansion project. Certainly, it doesn't make tons of sense to have vehicular access through this area, but thinking about having some sort of pedestrian plaza, pathway, trail, something that connects from Highway 40 across Clayton Court to the river. And then you've got these kind of 3 points of access. You've got a good kind of grid system going. And this potential park dedication would play in really quite nicely with that. I mean, it's really up in the air what exactly this park would include, but I mean, it's maybe not too hard to envision this as an open plaza area with buildings surrounding it, for example. So,
And on that same note, are we still looking at connection to 804?
yeah, so that's not really shown here, but certainly that's something that town staff has talked about is having Clayton Court extend, over Elk Creek and behind the Holiday Inn to connect to the existing traffic signal right at Safeway and 804. Certainly that requires some more kind of infrastructure work, if you will, to make that all work out. But
Army Corps permitting.
sure, yeah, with the creek crossing. But this park dedication does kind of tie into an idea that's been discussed internally with town staff, I would say. And I think at least this concept of these, lines of connectivity are going to be reflected in the conceptual plan for downtown and the Riverwalk district, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is the idea that it's not vehicle connectivity on Eisenhower going through, or would we put a road there?
Correct.
If we could.
Yeah, I don't think anyone,
We have to get rid of the building
yeah,
to put a road there.
Right,
Have to buy it and put it in the building.
right.
yeah,
I
I think,
imagine it's a pricey one.
yeah, I think the current vision is purely just non-motorized access that aligns with Eisenhower between 40 and the river.
Gotcha.
Because you'd have vehicular access from Fraser and Clayton Avenue to the north and south.
Sure. Okay.
Uh,
Would it be a big expense, and would it be on the shoulders of the developers to move that well building?
At this point, yes. Their development has to accommodate the infrastructure that is on their site. I mean, one thing that has been just discussed at a high level is, recognizing that this site is within the boundaries of our DDA. There has been no formal ask at this point, but I mean, certainly any development within the DDA boundaries could submit a proposal to the DDA board, subject to ultimate approval by the Board of Trustees for any sort of financial incentive to, whether that's infrastructure work, whether that's kind of more of an economic incentive type of thing. But really at this point, it's that infrastructure is on their site. If they need to move it, it would be at the developer's cost.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Peggy that this is where we want the density and this is where we want stores. You want to be able to walk down the street and go buy a restaurant, go buy a clothing store, go buy a retail shop. I liked the idea of the park at first, but if we could move that well house, then yeah, I would, a small connection between, along Eisenhower would be great, but yeah, let's leave that open for now.
Sure, that's a fair feedback. Kevin or Greg, do you have any additional thoughts on kind of the parkland dedication proposal?
No, I think that all makes sense, and I think we're more than fine leaving it as a open-ended thing right now.
So speaking to a few other comments that the town provided as it relates to the phase one building, so we talked through all the raw water line and well items. Just another thing, drainage is certainly something that needs to be considered. That wasn't really a part of the sketch plan, which is fine, but certainly just need that detail later with their site plan submittal. And then even though there's a small slice here in phase one, maybe just I'll back up to this slide. There's a small slice that is shown as part of phase one that is adjacent to Highway 40. Really the intention of the Riverwalk zone code is to have retail or commercial uses on both street frontages. Now, I recognize that there are inherent challenges again with this site. I think this is the only property, at least today, that has frontage on both of these streets, right? So the requirement to provide retail on both sides is it's intentional. It's part of the town's vision for this area, but meeting it on this site specifically, I recognize has challenges. But one thing specifically that town staff just identified is this sliver here that doesn't have commercial uses. Something that was mentioned is how this elevated pedestrian pathway through the site originally was proposed with stairs. One other potential option would be to make this an ADA compliant pathway and have it ramp down from Highway 40 to Clayton Court. And there is a carve out in the commercial frontage requirement in our code for pedestrian circulation, which certainly this would, obviously meet that definition. However, is a ADA compliant pathway the highest and best use of land in this specific location? Specifically, when thinking about, this is roughly where that alignment with the stairs was shown on their sketch plan, just to line up with the existing crosswalk at Goranson Station. But as has been discussed already, CDOT, the conceptual plans show that crossing being eliminated and relocated just a bit to the south to align with Clayton Avenue. And as part of the Clayton Court infrastructure work, the town is planning to add this sidewalk connection on this piece here. So connecting this existing sidewalk on Highway 40 down onto Clayton Court, where also sidewalks would be provided. So again, going back to this kind of vision of east-west connectivity, is a pathway roughly here through the site completely necessary? I would argue maybe not, especially if this crosswalk is relocated. But certainly if that's something that the developer wants to provide, and it still provides some benefit to have additional points of, pedestrian access above and beyond kind of what's envisioned with these kind of three key spines, if you will.
Well, as Katie noted early in the discussion, that's the crux of the curve, right, where that little piece of this site comes up to the highway, and commercial on that little piece would be pretty difficult, and it might more logically fit with the next phase with the
Right.
larger lot at the corner of Clayton Avenue.
Yeah.
And I think even some replatting, if they wanted to extend that commercial into that little section would make sense, or I think that whole piece is going to make more sense with the next project. So
Yeah.
it doesn't really fit with this one very well. There's not really any way to put a building right there in that small area just to get some commercial space up on a pretty challenged part of the highway right there. So,
And you're talking about that narrow gray section that we're looking at
Right,
right there
yeah.
now?
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's kind of the suggestion as well. And I'll speak to that when we talk about phase two, just maybe, not including this area in phase one at all.
maybe,
Yeah.
that might give them more flexibility again,
Mhm.
so,
Yeah.
and give us more flexibility as we look at that next plat, so.
Kevin, what are your thoughts on that?
That's perfectly fine with us. Because a little bit of background there. We like the 40 retail in phase two a lot. It just gets so complicated as you move towards phase one with the weird angles, and then the 9 foot drop off. So we're going to have to stilt phase two regardless, to be at grade on 40 and at grade on Clayton, which is just a huge lift. To do that for anything smaller than that is just kind of tough. It's just like stilting a little 500 square foot building, and then begs the question of where do people park? What if someone is on Clayton and wants to get there? They have to walk all the way around. So we're starting to tackle those in phase two. I think phase one is just, hey, let's get Clayton a little more activated, and get something there that proves that people are going to be down here.
And logically, phase one and two share a driveway, right? So
Mhm.
back to the parking, so that little piece could become part of that shared driveway and even be completely part of phase two, so possibly.
Exactly. And that's with the shared drive access, the goal is to minimize curb cuts on Clayton. So you're not walking through a bunch of driveways. So hopefully it's just one drive and then tucked under parking for phase two, or some kind of hidden parking for phase two is the goal.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
That crossing on Clayton Avenue, I think would be sufficient for accessible crossing and would be more safe because it's less around the corner. So yeah, leaving that, I appreciate the thoughtfulness of there possibly being an accessible way to over the pedestrian raised pathway. But I do think that Clayton Avenue is close enough to fulfill that need.
Right.
Yeah, thank you, Joy, for that comment.
Yeah, I use that abandoned crosswalk almost daily, and it's no problem to, I think, foot traffic wise, to move it down to a more logical
Yeah.
Sure,
location,
yeah.
especially if
Yeah.
CDOT is looking at closing the end of Byers Avenue, which that
Mhm.
whole little triangular piece there that left over Gordon's Station is
Yeah,
Yeah,
a
it's a
huge problem. So,
cluster.
yeah,
it's interesting. So yeah, I think if this were implemented, it would clean up several things, and it's good to hear, Joy, that you still think it would provide sufficient ADA accessible access.
Yeah, thank you.
So I also did want to speak a bit about these Highway 40 concept plans as it kind of relates to some other things, maybe adjacent to this proposed development. So again, the full document is in the packet. But in speaking through some of the highlights of what's proposed in the area, starting with a traffic signal at Eisenhower. I mean, I think this is extremely likely to ultimately happen and be incorporated into the final designs for Highway 40. It's kind of hard to see, but these rectangles with an X through them, these are areas that are anticipated to have their existing, curb cuts, existing driveways that were proposed to be closed. So these three properties, I think it's 260, 280, 330 Xerox Street, but not this one here, which I think is 240. That would still have its driveway maintained, at least per the conceptual plans. And then again, Byers Avenue being closed at Highway 40 and a new road routed through here. It's kind of uncertain whether these would actually be incorporated in the final design. Closing off existing accesses is always a contentious issue. And certainly for these properties in the interim, they would need to have some sort of solution to have, access essentially from Clayton Court. But again,
And those properties go through to Clayton Court?
they do not. So, well, with the exception of this one here. These two, which I believe are the like health clinic and then the home right adjacent to it, they only have frontage on Highway 40.
So how are they closing? How are they closing those if they don't have access anywhere else?
I am not totally sure based on, just what's being shown here. I don't know if the assumption was that some sort of shared access could be given through this property to these two. Or access would be, through the Clayton Court property, which this area right here, this is the well house building right where the red dot is. I don't know if CDOT at the time, 4 years ago, assumed they could get access from the rear through this parcel.
So that building on the left,
This one,
yep, is that the Wally Elvis property or something else?
Yes, yeah.
it is.
Okay.
Larry's
Um,
old shop, yeah.
If that were to be acquired, it doesn't look like we could quite. Could we have Eisenhower run there? That
That's what we were
was
looking at,
acquired
the
at one
east-west connections before Katie, so.
Was that?
Then we were looking at the east-west connections on the map that he had previously, and we
Yeah.
talked about that being a pedestrian access
Right.
down, but I see what you're saying is maybe that could access all
Because
those
if
properties, so.
we're thinking about a parking structure somewhere, that
Mhm.
would be a sweet spot to be able to pull people off and in to
Which structure?
a parking structure.
Okay,
Anyway,
Yeah,
I-
Katie, that's been talked about before for that. That's a great location for a parking structure, especially if you want to close off Clayton Court for events.
Yeah.
Where it becomes more of a pedestrian plaza at certain times.
Yeah.
And having that access right through with Eisenhower, I think is fantastic, especially if you could park at the Union Pacific Railroad right of way. Or if you're able to park in the parking garage that could be located on that property, it just has really good opportunity for that to be consolidated parking on this whole downtown area, east side of Highway 40.
yeah,
And it could be a good discussion with the town or the DDA to support, maybe working with these guys to look at some type of a joint venture on that property.
but there's not enough room to extend Eisenhower across the street there without the Alpine building being gone. Who's the thought? No big deal. We can keep going.
and pretty good grade difference there too, so.
Yeah, I think it would just be challenging in general to extend
Okay.
a road connection through here.
Okay.
Even if these buildings weren't here, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
As a drop in elevation.
So again, this just highlights some of the
Hmm.
things that are anticipated in,
Hmm.
along Highway 40 adjacent to this site. Again, relocated crosswalk from Goranson a bit to the south. Just to close the loop on this parkland dedication, if it were accepted by the town, this does not count towards the site's open space requirement. So again, kind of if that's not the direction that's ultimately taken, kind of it doesn't impact either way. The requirement to still provide open space on the site, which is only a 5% minimum. So even when just looking at kind of this small triangular open space area that's kind of needed for the well, I think this was fairly close to that 5% requirement already from my recollection, or
But
it gets.
just to go back to that discussion though, is there a mechanism where a developer can dedicate his open space to the public and still have the open space requirement met? Could they plat the project, have the open space as part of the plat, and then after the plat, donate that open space to the town?
I think they certainly could.
I think that we haven't, it would be a good thing in some cases for open space to become public and parkland. So just a thought.
And that's a fair point. It's just, the way I read our code is that parkland dedications are separate from required open space and
Well, this would be over and above. We're just trying to find a way to make open space public.
exactly.
This is an age-old conversation at the county level too.
Mhm.
Winter Park Ranch is full of open space that people can't access. Winter Park Highlands, the same thing. All these pockets of wonderful. Well, Charlie and Diana Rao finally made that little open space by their place, a
Hmm.
public park somehow. So anyway, they're just, ongoing, I think this discussion of somehow making open space more accessible to the public has merit.
No, that's a fair point. I think, so a couple thoughts. I guess one, town staff could, moving forward, interpret any parkland dedications as counting towards open space requirement so that, if a developer has a, significant area that would be suitable for a park that they want to dedicate to the town, it gives them more flexibility and with elsewhere in their development such that they don't have to provide as much open space as,
Yeah, I think it should be a plum. I mean,
yeah.
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 And this is all zoned zero lot line, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
I'm surprised that there's even a 5% open space requirement at all.
Yeah, so that,
We settled on a minimum amount.
yeah.
Yeah.
And,
It's just if we're looking for density and commercial district, and it doesn't really fit to have open space on the lots.
it's a fair point. And, I also wonder
Just a Beasley Park bench, Brian.
if,
Ways to stretch out your legs.
well, and our open space is also broad enough to encompass, decks, plazas, patios. So it doesn't just have to be, grassed or landscape areas per se.
Would that kind of plaza between phase 1 and phase 2 be enough for 5% of the whole property?
Are you talking about like this triangular piece or what?
Basically just that elevated pedestrian walkway.
Oh, likely no. As shown here, forget how long this is. Let me just go to phase 2.
And again, they're gonna have to dedicate that open space around the well anyway, in that case, so.
Yeah. But if a, public walkway with a, public access easement is created, that also does count as open space per our code. So, I guess
So
one other,
where,
oh, go ahead.
excuse me, Gary,
You're
thank
good.
you. So where the accessible part concept would have been for that elevated pedestrian path, could that front part be dedicated open space to create like a safety gap between as people are going from the highway over that path, right where that front is, right there, yeah.
What do you mean by a safety gap?
Just to open it up for people entering that path from the highway. It was just a thought about.
Joy, one
Just a-
thing we've been talking about with Garrett and a few others, I think, which I think you're alluding to, is creating off of 40 in phase 2, and off of Clayton in phase 1, kind of like a cutout in the building, that is public open space that would likely be covered public open space. So that I don't know what the 6 foot, 7 foot sidewalk on 40, in some places goes back 10 feet, and can be used for restaurant patios, park benches, whatever people want there. But we're looking at doing that on 40, to create those kind of gathering areas. So that's not just a 6 foot sidewalk or 8 foot sidewalk all the way down. And I think, Garrett, if you have the conceptuals of that steamboat building, you can kind of see what they did. And it's cool. It adds like a little flavor, and instead of just like a wall, which is kind of nice.
There's Lori's building.
Yeah, I'll pull that up here real quick.
Old architect.
Um,
Dale,
Yes.
and this is.
Yeah.
That.
They need to get rid of all 3 of those.
Yeah. This must be the wellhead.
We can hear you, Peggy.
Yeah, so you can see this one's a little weird because that's a cutout for drive on the left, but on the right, what they did is just cut out the building, so the retail's pushed back a little bit, and then you have a small like plaza area where you can put some park benches, some landscaping, a picnic table. That's public space, and then it makes the sidewalk feel like instead of being 8 feet, it's a 16 or 20 foot area there. So we have some of that in the plans, and we'll do that on Clayton too. But I think, Garrett, when we talked, you said that would count towards open space, I believe.
Mhm.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, with the intention being, those areas, it's kind of a combination of like open space, but supportive of the retail business, if that makes sense, while also giving the benefit of a more interesting building facade that's not just a, continuous wall. So,
I think it's great it's covered too, because on nasty days, it's
yeah,
sure wonderful to have a refuge point for
Mhm.
pedestrians. So
yeah.
we'll get a few of those.
So just wrapping up here, I'll go back to the presentation. So some of the discussion we've already had with phase two, but a couple things I want to talk about. Really what we're seeing here is kind of the ground floor view, with the idea that along Clayton Court, so kind of the ground level of this building would be street level with Clayton Court. There would be retail commercial uses, again, at least 20 feet in depth along Clayton. And behind it would be parking. And it'd kind of be like, it would kind of almost be like a parking garage because there would be a building on top of this area. I think roughly, and maybe Kevin chime in, but I think you could probably accommodate about 30-ish spaces in this area. Largely to serve the uses in phase two, but if necessary, uses in phase one. Again, there's also going to be some parallel spaces anticipated in front of the building here. Obviously not in front of the driveway access or closer to the intersection with Clayton Ave, but probably 3 or 4. Above this footprint, the second level of this is likely, at street level with Highway 40. Because again, there's that, 9-foot grade differential between the two. And then along Highway 40, there's that requirement to have retail commercial uses at the street level. And what Kevin was talking about was the idea, again, to replicate the same thing where you have not just a building front on this entire area, but you have, this nice footprint to work with to do interesting things with, multiple building footprints and plazas, outdoor dining areas, and things like that. And then there would likely be a third level on top, which would, I'm sure would mostly have residential uses. And then just finally, again, the suggestion to maybe include this sliver here as part of phase two to kind of extend the street level retail along Highway 40, that entire frontage.
Just setting back that retail, just to open it
Yeah,
next to the highway.
yeah, absolutely. So in talking through next steps, so this development would require both a major site plan and a major subdivision. Certainly it's anticipated we just see the site plan for phase one in the near future. Likely though, a subdivision plat for the entire site so that, phase two could just be ready to go with just a site plan approval and not further plat approval. I do want to note that town code does allow that a sketch plan can be required by town staff in lieu of a preliminary plat. Ultimately, staff is agreeable to the preliminary plat being waived, so long as, an additional kind of more detailed sketch plan is submitted for administrative review. The logic being this sketch plan here has been presented to you all, the planning commission. And certainly you would all see this application again at the final plat major site plan stage. So this would just help reduce kind of the scheduling burden, if you will, and scheduling multiple meetings for the planning commission 3 times, like once with the sketch plan, again with the preliminary plat, and then a third and final time with the final plat before it goes to the board for final approval. So This is still certainly going to come back to the planning commission again. And again, town staff has communicated the desire to see another, slightly more detailed sketch plan that kind of takes these comments into consideration before their actual site plan is submitted.
Yeah, Garrett, I think our goal from here is to spend some time incorporating these comments and really beefing this up and still calling it a sketch plan. And then bringing it back in front of you and potentially the planning commission, just so everyone feels comfortable. So then when we cement it into the actual plat application, we feel good about all the changes that we made instead of trying to make changes between preliminary and final plat like we've done in the past.
Yeah, that's a good point. Certainly the revised sketch plan can be brought to the planning commission again, but there's also less burden on staff and the applicant to do so. These sketch plans aren't public hearings, preliminary plats are. So again, yeah, we can certainly bring the a revised sketch plan back before the site plan and final plat submittal.
So are we envisioning tearing Clayton Court up then the paved section here?
What do you mean by tearing up, I guess?
Is it gonna be, the pavement gonna be demolished and then new street laid or?
I think in general, yes, I can pull up kind of our current design plans. If you give me a second.
Yeah, and then the other piece of feedback has to do with stormwater, and we've talked about this some. I'm hoping that we can possibly look at some alternatives to these piped systems that could be ongoing maintenance issues. And I know we've talked about it with St. Louis Creek Landing, and we're going to be having long conversations about how we work with our present stormwater mapping that we've done. And I just think that there are ways in this Arctic and cold environment to do stormwater without such long range piping and all the maintenance that goes along with underground systems. So
Yeah. Tiffany was talking about having the green spaces that to put the stormwater on, so
Mhm.
it works its way back into
so
the groundwater.
Yeah.
And it seems like that green space where our wellhead would be an appropriate spot for that.
well, you gotta be careful around a wellhead, obviously, too, though. So, but basically, they're called rain gardens, and it's a place where the stormwater can settle out
Mhm.
and go back into the soil before it overflows and comes the better product and enters the watershed.
Yeah.
So
that's the advantage of having some of those pockets of green space,
Yeah.
because they could be utilized for that.
exactly, yeah,
At least that's what Tiffany was saying.
yeah. And then
in
Jeff
case the-
Jeff Elliott's been talking about that too. And,
Yeah.
it's interesting. And the mapping is showing almost all the stormwater on the west side of the tracks in Old Town goes through the elementary school through the willows down there.
It's perfect.
Yeah, so,
Hmm.
and that could be an educational type place too, and our watershed group is hoping to work with CSU and maybe do a stormwater session this winter. Because Winter Park is in the same planning process.
Mhm.
We hope to propose to Granby that they enter that. Grand Lake is actually completing their plans for the west side of town for their stormwater, which is going to use a wetland, an existing wetland area to help purify that stormwater before it enters the watershed. So
Yeah.
anyway, so just some conversations that I hope we have. A surface system, if it fills up with silt and debris, it's obvious you need to get a backhoe out there and clean it out. As a pipe fills up slowly but surely with this compacted clay material that we have from our fine sediments, suddenly it's not working anymore and the stuff is turned to concrete and you're faced with digging a pipe up if you can't get a rotor-rooter down it to clean it out. So,
Mhm.
so just some things to think about. And I know we have to plan for, in these densely developed areas, we got to plan for a lot of stormwater coming off of buildings and everything else too. So we can't do it irresponsibly. The last thing we want is one of these rain garden areas to overflow raw stormwater in the spring into the river. So they have to be engineered and planned right. But I think that there's some alternatives we need to look at here. So
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, the intention is to have a more regional as opposed to site by site
Right.
approach as
Yeah.
well to stormwater.
that's why we've done all this mapping, was
Mhm.
to try try and deal with it on a scale where everybody's not forced to deal with their site like we had at Cost Lake. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. Guys, obviously we're excited about these projects and all of the buildings that are going in on Clayton Court are hugely important, but I think the phase 2 building is probably the most important plot of land. That's what people will see from the
Right, over
Safeway
there,
light. Within the comprehensive plan, I know that the group, Cushing Terrell, is very excited about helping to plan this downtown area. So I know it's another stakeholder, but I think it'd be great if you guys could reach out to them and see what kind of ideas they have for the area and see if we can, make a congruent kind of design for the entire area. I know you guys are hoping to build almost all of it out, but and so I'm sure you have thoughts, but getting them involved, I think would be a very good idea.
Definitely. I know Greg had to jump, but he is reaching out to them and is in contact with them. But yeah, they're, I mean, an invaluable resource right now that why not take advantage of them to help us out here.
Perfect.
So they own the phase 2 property?
Yeah, these guys do.
Yeah, so we control all of everything in that sketch plan right now.
Okay.
And eventually we're working on the right across the street from there as well, but that's a few years off.
Gotcha. Okie doke.
Anything else in review? Okay,
All right.
Exciting.
yeah.
Thank you. It is exciting. It's good working
Yeah.
with you guys.
Thank you all, and we want to keep the door open on phase 1 and on phase 2. So if anyone has suggestions, ideas, anything, we're always open to that. And thank you, Garrett, for kind of setting this up and teeing it up. It's immensely helpful.
Yeah, well, I appreciate y'all's time and y'all's efforts on this, and it is exciting to see development activity continue in our downtown area. So
Really appreciate the partnership and thoughtful collaboration. Thank you.
Okay, thanks all.
Yeah.
I just
I'm going to throw one out there real quick. Thinking on that phase 2 on the corner, as you turn down onto Clayton Court on the Highway 40 level, to have a restaurant that would face west and south. And like you say, inset and with the windows, I think right there, there's so many people coming to town. That could be something that could be really appealing and get people off the road. Just a thought.
Yeah, it's good.
We'll send around in the next couple of weeks the restaurant concepts, because I think you're gonna like what they're planning. The restaurant group we're working with is planning to do there. You hit the nail on the head on what they're trying to do.
Cool. Sweet. Love it.
Okay. So
Thank you.
any other
Yes.
business tonight?
I just have one comment I'd like to make to Garrett. We've had a couple of these sketch plans that have come to us now where we actually haven't acted on them. Clark at one of the last planning meetings came in and said, let's just talk about this. Let me find out what you guys really want. We can go back and flip the plans around and make things work. These guys came to us ahead of time and said, let's just talk and let's get your thoughts and let's incorporate that into our real sketch plan that we're going to bring back and try to sell you on.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think maybe we're onto something here, because
Yeah, it's great.
maybe that should be sort of like offer each developer that's coming in with a sketch plan to say, would you like to come before the planning commission for a little, quick, here's what we're planning on doing. What do you guys think? And then that way it actually saves them a lot of work, because some of these sketch plans, we've had them go back and do extensive changes to make us happy.
Right.
If we could
Right.
get the sketch plan to make us happy quicker,
So is it
when
something,
they first come to us with the sketch plan, it would help everybody out.
do we need to incorporate that into our code?
Well, I'm just throwing
Since
that out there.
This is starting to be the pattern. I don't
Yeah.
know how it fits, but it makes sense to
Yeah.
me, Bob.
Yeah, it
It's great.
seems like it's a good idea to keep this going. So
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm glad to hear that. I think per our code right now, sketch plans are completely optional, and it's kind of up to the applicant um, whether or not they would like to prepare one. Certainly, they are extremely helpful, I think, as you all have now seen, and I think the primary incentive to do one is that ability to waive the preliminary plat stage, right? So it takes one more public hearing out of the process. Maybe there are some pros and cons with that, but I think in general, it does start the conversation earlier, especially with you all as planning commissioners, and could make the process smoother overall in general. So I can certainly see what some other municipalities do, think about ways to maybe incentivize it further, or even just make it a requirement. We do also require pre-application meetings. Typically, at those pre-application meetings, the developer or applicant has something. It may not be totally fleshed out, but generally they're more than just a conversation of, I don't even really know what I'm doing. Talk me through the zoning regs or whatever. So
We don't need those here.
right, and we certainly don't need those before the planning commission, but I guess any type of pre-application conversation like that, maybe encouraging that applicant to pursue the sketch plan process as well, so that they also get in front of this planning commission and yeah. So
No, because I mean, a fair amount, I mean, the level of this plan that was presented tonight was just about perfect. 'Cause
Yeah.
we do need some time before the meeting to think about this. I was able to walk over there and look at it, and several of us I did, I'm sure, but
Mhm.
anyway, we don't want to have the conversation you have to have with the new lot owner in town and, yes, so, anyway, but you're right though, Bob, completely, this is good to have it before, a tremendous amount of money's been put into designing grading plans and all the things that go into a preliminary plat or a final plat if they decide to pass that up, so.
yeah.
I have another question about these buildings. So are they planning to go to 45 feet? Is that the intent?
At least for this first one, and Greg or Kevin clarify, but yes, the phase one building would be 3 stories, 45 feet. I think looking at the phase two site with that grade differential, it's possible that it would be, say, 3 stories on the Clayton Court side and 3 stories on the Highway 40 side, but that's up to further determination and
That-
review and what they actually do with that.
That was my next question. So what do you do when you have a 10-foot drop from one side to the other? I know that Grand Parks code is based on the four corners, but
Right.
like,
And we
prob-
had this discussion during
Yeah.
the Grand Park review, so.
Yeah, so it's hard to say with any certainty without any proposal for what those building footprints would be, is the short and easy answer, I think. But if it was just a continuous building footprint, our code would require that we measure from the lowest point, i.e. the Clayton Court side, to whatever the highest point is. So per that definition, if it was just one continuous building, for example, like technically you could only build up to 2 stories, if you will, on the Highway 40 side, more than likely.
Gotcha. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, that's gonna be the building that you see.
Mhm.
So a big building is what I'm envisioning.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, it makes no sense to me to not at least get 3 stories on 40.
Mm-hmm.
If that results in something be a little higher than 45 feet on Clayton Court side, I think that's all right.
Right.
And
Yeah, the
if,
comp-
if you looked at the four corners average,
Mhm.
to measure from, maybe you can get, 4 stories to 3 stories with, the cut back into the bank.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and it accommodates the garage underneath.
Right, yeah.
Mhm.
It'd be awesome.
Yeah.
For the
So
window
yeah, this
parking.
height discussion was something we kind of left hanging after Mark's proposal. It would be worth trying to flesh this out, so.
Yeah, and it's certainly a conversation we'll continue to have and look at and discuss.
It's always good to have the conversation before you're presented with a building that Yeah, it doesn't conform to the,
Well, and I'm curious too, when it comes down, like right now, it's 9 foot below Highway 40.
Mhm.
But over in not Victoria Village.
St. Louis
but
Landing.
Yeah, thank you, it's getting late for me. They're having to bring fill in. So it's not gonna be as much below Highway.
well, the fill's being stored there, Katie,
So
so.
it'll be interesting to
Yeah.
see how that goes. But so either 4 or maybe 3 if they do have to bring it, whatever, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, so again, in the case of Victoria Village, yes, they're adding some fill to the site, but per their site plan, based on the previous like existing grade, that building is still within 55 feet of, where if you measure to the midpoint of their pitched roof to the existing grade lines, they're within 55 feet, even though they're adding fill and raising that building and it's 4 stories. Does that make sense? So anyways, but yes,
Yeah.
it's certainly something we need to continue to look at with this application, with other applications. Yeah.
It's exciting.
Excuse me, Garrett.
Yeah,
This is
Joy.
Joy. I love the open communication, as Bob stated. I do imagine including the sketch plan in the town code may increase the workload on the town planner to a greater extent. Garrett, how have you found this partnership from your point of view as far as manageability?
Yeah, I think overall it's been very positive, and I think as Andy kind of mentioned, especially with this sketch plan, the level of detail is to a lower level such that it results in a faster review on the part of town staff. Which is, so it means it's not as quite as a lift as, reviewing a full site plan application, for example. And it has the added benefit of, well, the detail isn't so specific or finalized yet that the applicant does have the flexibility to make changes based on this feedback. So I do think overall it would result in fewer review comments at the site plan submittal stage, hopefully. And really it doesn't create much more administrative burden to process these sketch plans, I would say.
Oh, it seems like a win-win.
It's
Good.
yeah.
So any other business or future agenda items discussion or?
I was gonna ask Clark about the yellow buildings, just to get an update. I don't know, have you heard anything?
I have not really heard anything specifically, nor have I reached out. I don't know, Michael, if you have any.
They poured concrete on the roof. They did pass some welding inspections a couple weeks ago. They have windows on order, which they're anticipating, I think, to get within the next week or two.
That's great.
And they're looking at getting those windowed in. The roof, I think, finished. They're looking at pouring, I think, rubber on top of the cement that's on the roof. So there's progress. I mean, there's progress. And as far as the expectation that I think Clark provided from his February or March presentation at the beginning of this year, I think he's on schedule, but we can absolutely reach out to him. We had an update with him at our monthly meeting. And we've got another one coming up here soon. And following that update, we can provide an update to the board and the planning commission as well.
Okay.
We may have to start calling them the yellow and white buildings now. Since the ephes that he's putting on now is
Yeah.
a different color from what's weathered out.
Yeah.
Well, right, just it's
Okay,
good. Tell well, you can tell where it's been added on.
Yeah.
So that's good.
anything else?
The only other thing I have is just a reminder that our next meeting is in 3 weeks on November 13th. And then that will be our last meeting for the year.
And I have a condition on that meeting. I'm gonna be in Austin, Texas during that period of time, so I could Zoom in, I
Okay.
could call in, but I won't be here in person.
Okay.
That's okay. We'll miss you, but you'll be here virtually.
All right.
If you can.
Yeah. Should
Appreciate
be
it.
able to, no problem. Last time I checked, they have internet down there. Didn't they have internet when you went to school down there?
They sure did.
Okay,
So motion to adjourn,
I move to adjourn.
I'll second it.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye,
Thanks,
All
everybody.
right, good meeting.
thank you.
Thank you all.
It was very good.